I've been following Lloyd very closely for the last year and a half in my role as the Pentagon reporter for Defense News. In that job, I've followed him to Asia, or the Indo-Pacific, as the US calls the region that stretches from the oceans of South America all the way to Asia, and gone on trips that lasted multiple weeks as he met with leaders around the region and also implemented America's new strategy for countering China, much of which is based on its work with allies that he's meeting with there. The big story of the last 4 years is how this administration was the first one to, from the start, say that China was its top competitor. The way it was going to compete was two ways. One, building American strength at home, and to counter it abroad, and that's in large part through work with America's allies. With allies, it's been successful in knitting these countries together, countries that didn't want anything to do with each other or little to do with each other before. That would include Japan and South Korea, which have a long and difficult relationship based in Japanese colonial history. This is based in large recognition on the idea that America can't do it alone anymore. It needed a web or a network of countries who are all putting skin in the game, as I mix metaphors here, so that they can then compete with China in a more broad and distributed manner. That's based in large part on American humility, which hasn't been always true in the past. And the center of the story is Lloyd, who is the current Secretary of Defense, who's been around all 4 years of the Biden administration. This is somebody who did not have a lot of experience in Asia before he came into the office, and there were a lot of doubts about the way that he would handle Asia policy given that lack of experience. Administration at the White House was setting the policy while people like Austin were implementing it at the DoD level. And he did that in large part through the value of relationships with local leaders, many of whom he is close friends with. The places that they fell on most short, and some members of the Biden administration admit this, things like the defense industry. They came into office wanting to expand America's production of weapons, which is a problem that grew more acute after the wars in Gaza and Ukraine began. But in large part, this is a problem that will require a generation to solve, they argue. They have missiles or ships that are running very far behind schedule and over cost. Meanwhile, China is churning out thousands of these, or at least has increased production by thousands over the last 4 years, just per open DoD figures. This is a problem that will require the next administration to step in and try to work in a more constructive way, given how difficult it will be to solve. I think it's important to note that China, as it grew more powerful, was an uncertain adversary, or maybe not an adversary at all for the US, which had long had a friendly relationship with it. It allowed China into multilateral organizations. It gave it free trading status. It helped accede it to the World Trade Organization. And decades ago was sharing defense equipment with it in a way that it would many other countries today. That changed with the arrival, in large part, of Xi Jinping, China's current leader, who showed up on stage in 2013 as the Chinese leader that he is today. He's become a much more aggressive and much more powerful leader internally, meaning the Chinese Communist Party is made up of many officials who give authority to the government, and Xi, more so than any leader since Deng Xiaoping or Mao Zedong decades ago, has consolidated that power. At the lower levels, the administration, and Austin specifically, have tried to bring this to the military through a change in tactics. So you have the military services, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, changing the way that they fight, or at least they think about fighting, in a way that will allow the US to be more distributed and more mobile. The idea being that you have a bunch of small units that can move quickly around the region. They're harder for China to target in a way that they could before, with America's very dense, large bases concentrated in Northeast Asia and Guam. Those are in essence held hostage due to Chinese missiles that are just staggering in their range and number at this point. So what America has done through the Air Force and the Marine Corps is redesign its way of fighting. That will include things like the Air Force's Agile Combat Employment Plan, which is the idea that you're going to have runways that can move in a much more distributed fashion to spread out American planes and fighters so that they won't be as easy to hit. And then also Marine Corps' Force Design, which is basically a name for taking the Marine Corps, moving away from these land capabilities, the ability to fight on big stretches of flat land with tanks and other tracked vehicles, and then moving more toward units that can fight in things like littorals. What will be the legacy of the Biden team? They argue, from the Pentagon at least, that they came in at a time when its deterrence, or ability to stop a conflict with China, was rapidly eroding. Now they argue that that's steadied, or at least stabilized for the time going forward, but it's a garden that will require tending. All of this, meanwhile, with a president who's coming in and is much less personally committed, not necessarily his staff, but himself, to working with American allies in the same way.